Restoring your backup is just as critical as taking them. There's this saying, you don't have a backup unless you have tested the restore. If you keep on taking backups and you have not tested them, in the event of a crisis, how do you know that your database will restore if you have never performed a restore? So it's important that you periodically test your restores. Before getting into the practical stuff, there are a couple of things you need to understand. It's important to note that when restoring a database from a backup, it will overwrite the data that currently exists in the database. So be sure to take a backup of the existing database if it's something that you want to retain. If you restore an older database version to a newer SQL Server version, that database will be automatically upgraded to the new version. This prevents the database from being used with another older version of the database engine. So if you restore a database from SQL Server version 2019 to SQL Server 2022 and then you try to back up that database and restore it back to the SQL Server 2019, then you'll have issues restoring that database. So you'd have to script out the entire database, which is not ideal if the database is a large database, or the alternate option is you can generate a backpack file and then import it to the lower version, but you cannot do a direct backup and restore. Another important thing to note is that if the compatibility level of the database is 100 or higher before the upgrade, it remains the same after the upgrade. If the compatibility level is 90 before the upgrade, in the upgraded database, the new compatibility will be set to 100, which is the lowest supported compatibility level in SQL Server 2016 and higher. Another thing to note is that if you're in a situation where you need to restore an encrypted database, you need access to the certificate or asymmetric key used to encrypt that database. Without the certificate or asymmetric key, you can't restore that database. So you need to save that certificate used to encrypt the backup for as long as you need to save that backup. So let's head over to SQL Server Management Studio and see how you can perform your first restore. And guys, these are practical things that you'll do on a day-to-day basis as a SQL Server Database administrator. So I'm trying to give you the most practical examples as possible. So whenever you're finished doing this course, you can head right into the organization and start operating like an experienced database administrator. So here we have the AdventureWorks database, and we're going to accidentally drop this database, right? Right click and delete, and now we don't have the AdventureWorks database anymore. Now if you didn't have any backup at all, you need to be panicking in this situation because now you lost all your data and how are you going to get it back? But don't worry, now that you have a restore, you can restore your database to a point where you lose little to no data, if any at all. So right click databases, restore database, select the device option, then browse, then select add, and then search for the backup that you want to restore. I'm going to be restoring the AdventureWorks 2022 backup file. Select OK and select OK again. Now before we hit OK, we have a few things we need to cover. If we wanted to change the name of the database before the restore is complete, then we can change it here. This is ideal in a case where you have two databases on the same instance and you want to change the name to something else before you make it available to users, or before you swap it with the database you are restoring on the instance. So I'm going to be calling this 2022. This is a great way to create a copy of your database on the same instance. So on the Files tab is a very important tab. If you wanted to relocate the files to another drive that has more space on your server, then here's where you can change it while you are restoring your database. You also have the option to change the file name that will be stored on the physical disk. So here I have 2012, I can change it to 22. It reflects my database. And another reason why this is important again is because if you are restoring a copy of a database, you'll have conflicting file names on the file system and your restore will fail. So you can rename your files before you restore the database. Now on the Options tab, you have several options of how you can restore your database. You can overwrite the existing database with replace, or you can preserve replication setting with keep replication. You can also restore the database in a restricted user mode, so only users with system administrator access so only users with similar permissions like the sysadmin permission can access that database. This is ideal if you don't want end users to be able to connect to the database after it is restored. For the recovery state, you have restore with recovery. With this state, you can immediately access the database once it is restored. For the restore with no recovery, the database will be in a state where you can apply transaction logs to restore the database to a point in time. In this state, the database will not be accessible. Then you have the restore with standby option. The restore with standby option leaves the database in a read-only mode. It undoes uncommitted transaction but saves the undo actions in a standby file so that recovery effects can be reverted. However, we want the database to be accessible immediately, so we're going to proceed with the recovery state. Then select OK. The database was restored successfully. So you should be seeing your database under databases. So now that we have completed a full restore, we're going to be restoring a differential backup. So the first step in restoring a differential backup, you have to restore the database in a recovery state. The first step in restoring a differential backup is to restore a full backup. So remember, when you're doing a differential restore, you have to restore at least 2 pieces of backups. So you have to start with your full backup and then the differential backup that you want to restore. So the first stage is to get the database in a recovery state. So right click on the database, select task, restore, restore database, then select device. Then browse for the database backup that you want to restore. Select add. I'll be going with the 2022-1 backup. Then select OK. Hit OK to continue. And the important option here is to select options. And for the recovery state, we're going to go with no recovery. So the database will not be immediately available to the end user. Now let's take a look at the database. You'll realize that it's in a restoring state. Now you can proceed to doing the differential restore. Right click on the database, select task, restore, select restore database, select device, then browse for the differential backup you want to restore. And I have a bunch of differential backups here. So from my previous lectures, the differential backup 3 would have been my last differential backup. So I'm going to go with that one. Then select OK. Then select OK again. On the options page now, we need to keep the recovery state as restore with recovery because we want the database to be immediately accessible to the end users. Select OK. And OK. So now our database is accessible to the end users. So 2 down, 1 more to go. It's now time to do a restore of a transaction log backup. So now we have to get the database in a recovery state again. So for the transaction log backup, if you have a differential backup, depending on where you took that backup and where you want to restore your transaction log backup, you would have to restore the full backup, then differential, then transaction log. So right click on the database, task, restore, database, browse for the file that you want to restore. So I'm going to be using the 2021 backup again, and I'll be restoring the database in a recovery state. So options, restore with recovery and select OK. So my restore has failed and that's because my database already exists. So now I need to overwrite the existing database. Then select OK. So right click the database, select task, then restore, and this time we're going to select transaction log. So we're going to go from the device, browse for the transaction log that we want to restore, select add. Here we have 2 transaction logs that we can restore, so select OK. And here you have the option to restore the database to a specific point in time. So I could restore my database back to say 9:10 p.m. on the 16th of the 12th. However, this will be ideal when you know your database failed at a specific point in time. So I'm going to go with the most recent possible state and select OK. So let's say you wanted to restore your database to 10 a.m. and your last full backup was 6 a.m. but you took transaction log backups every hour on the hour. So you'd have to restore your transaction log from 7 a.m., 8 a.m., and 9 a.m. and then restore the last one at 10 a.m. if it had completed successfully. Now you have to restore in this order so you don't have to miss any sequence. So if you had hit OK, right, and you had 2 more backups to be restored, you have to start from your full backup again and then restore subsequential transaction log backups. So on the options page, you'd have to leave the database in a non-operational state. So once I hit OK here, the database will be restored in an accessible state. Now, it's very important to note that you have to restore the transaction logs in the sequence in which they were backed up, because if you try to restore out of sequence, you will get an error in the process. So now we're going to be looking at a point-in-time restore using the demo database, where I went ahead and create a table where data is inserted every minute. So if you look carefully, data has been inserted since 8:27 p.m. Now we are going to perform a point-in-time restore to about 9 o'clock, and you'll see the difference in the data within the table. So right click the database, select task, restore, select database, and here you'll see the list of backups that are available to me. You have the full backup and 3 transaction log backups. These backups were done every 15 minutes. So the last backup was taken at 9:15 p.m. Now select on the timeline to restore the database to a specific point in time. So this is a slider that you could slide to view database that were in the past. Now if you look at the ticker, you'll see the various type of backups that are available to you. So the full green is the full backup, and then you have this light green here is a transaction log backup. Then you have this light green, which is a tail log backup, and then this little white triangle represent the differential backup. So we're going to be restoring our database to about 9 o'clock, and this should be reflected in the time which is in the table. So we're going to specify specific date and time. And then for the time, I am going to be specifying 9 a.m. If you had looked carefully, you would have realized that the ticker made a little slide. So let me do that again. 9:15, you see it pushes forward. And if I go 9 o'clock, then it slides backwards. Select OK. Now you can script out this operation, new query window, then select OK. So it's going through all the transaction logs and trying to locate the time where it needs to stop the restore. So the database is in use, so I need to drop the connection. So let me close these window and let me reattempt the restore. Select OK. So to resume, you have to change like the database name or something on the screen, and then select OK again. Let's confirm our timeline is the same, 9 p.m. Okay. These things do happen sometimes, so I'm going to take the database offline so it's not accessible to anyone. Select OK. So select OK, and the database should be restored. Then select OK. Ensure that if there are any connections to your database, you need to drop them before you attempt the restore. Now let's query the time tracker table to see where the data is at within the database. So it seems like I got a little data loss. My last transaction was up to 9:57, so that's still excellent. So that's pretty much how you take transaction log backups. In the next lecture, we're going to be taking a look at some backup strategies.